Every revolution in history followed the same 6 stages: the French Revolution, the Russian Revolution, the Chinese Revolution, the Iranian Revolution, every single one. And right now, in 2026, the United States has completed Stage 3 and is deep inside Stage 4. Think about that for a second. Not approaching it, not heading toward it, already inside it. In 1789, France was the most powerful monarchy in Europe, the most sophisticated culture on the continent, the most advanced military. Gone in 10 years. In 1917, the Russian Tsar ruled 1/6 of the entire world's land surface, the largest empire on Earth. Gone in months. In 1979, Iran was America's closest ally in the Middle East. A modern, westernized nation of 40 million people became America's greatest enemy overnight. These weren't random. They weren't accidents. They weren't bad luck. They followed a pattern. 3 moments in history when governments that looked completely stable suddenly collapsed into chaos. And every time, the people in power never saw it coming. They believed their authority could never be challenged. They believed the common people would never revolt. They believed the system they built was too powerful to ever break. But history proved them wrong every single time. The pattern has a name. It's called the 6-stage revolution cycle, first identified by Harvard historian Brinton. And most Americans have never heard of it. But every political scientist who studies national collapse knows it by heart. And here is what should stop you cold. The United States has already completed 3 of those stages. The growing gap between the rich and the poor, the corruption spreading through the halls of government, the public slowly losing trust in the very institutions meant to protect them, and beneath the surface, a quiet anger beginning to rise. We are living inside Stage 4 right now. This isn't left versus right. This isn't Republican versus Democrat. This is mathematics. This is history. Let me show you the pattern. Let me show you the proof. And then let me show you exactly where America stands inside it. Before we go through the pattern, you need to understand what a revolution actually is. Not a protest, not a riot, not an election that goes the wrong way. A revolution is when the entire existing order is dismantled. The government, the institutions, the social hierarchy, the rules that hold society together, all of it, destroyed and replaced with something new, often something far worse than what came before. Revolutions don't happen because people are suffering. Suffering has existed for all of human history. Peasants in medieval Europe suffered for centuries without revolution. Slaves in ancient Rome suffered for generations without revolution. Revolutions happen when expectations exceed reality, when people believe they deserve better than what they have, when they look at the elite and see excess, corruption, and indifference, when they look at their own lives and see stagnation, decline, and broken promises, and most critically, when they lose faith that the system can fix itself, that elections will change anything, that courts will deliver justice, that institutions will hold the powerful accountable. When peaceful reform starts to feel impossible, the population stops looking for a ballot. It starts looking for something else. Now, here is what history discovered about how that process actually unfolds. Brinton was a Harvard historian. In 1938, he published a book called The Anatomy of Revolution. He spent years studying every major revolution in modern history: the French Revolution, the English Revolution, the American Revolution, the Russian Revolution, and he found something that shocked the academic world. They were all the same, not similar, not comparable, the same stages, the same sequence. The 6 stages always appeared, always in the same order, without a single exception. Later historians expanded Brinton's work. Political scientists tested it against more modern examples: Iran, 1979, China, 1949,
Cuba, 1959. Every time, the pattern held.
France, 1789. In the 1780s, France was the center of the world. Paris was the cultural capital of Europe. French was the language of power. French philosophy shaped the entire Western world. King Louis XVI had ruled for decades. The monarchy had existed for 800 years. It seemed untouchable. It wasn't. Stage 1. Hidden fractures beneath the surface. Versailles was magnificent. The balls, the banquets, the art. From the outside, France looked invincible. But 98% of the population carried the entire tax burden. The nobility owned the land. The clergy owned the land. Neither paid a single franc in taxes. Meanwhile, the average peasant spent nearly everything they earned just on bread. Not luxury, bread. And in 1788, the harvest failed. Bread prices doubled overnight. People were starving in the streets of Paris, while the aristocracy hosted parties that cost more than a peasant would earn in a lifetime. The elite didn't notice, or didn't care. Either way, the result was the same. Stage 2. The government lost its credibility. Louis XVI was not a cruel man. He was something worse. He was weak, indecisive, completely disconnected from the reality of his people. France was bankrupt. Decades of war had destroyed the treasury. The government owed money everywhere, and Louis' solution was to borrow more and tax the peasants harder. He tried to tax the nobility. They refused. He tried to reform the system. The powerful blocked him at every turn, because the people with everything to lose would rather watch the country burn than give up a single privilege. Stage 3. The middle class radicalized. This is the stage most people miss. Revolutions don't begin with the poorest. They begin when the educated middle class, the lawyers, the merchants, the intellectuals, loses faith in the system. When Louis called the Estates General in 1789 to solve the crisis, it backfired completely. The Third Estate, educated, frustrated, and furious, realized their power. They formed the National Assembly. They swore they would not leave until France had a constitution. When lawyers and merchants declare the government illegitimate, revolution is no longer a possibility, it's a certainty. Stage 4. Institutions collapsed. July 14, 1789. The Bastille fell. The monarchy, the church, the courts all lost legitimacy overnight. The radicals took the streets. The moderates lost control. Both sides pushed further and further toward the extreme. Stage 5. The revolution consumed itself. The Jacobins seized power. Robespierre promised justice. What followed was the reign of terror. 17,000 people executed in 10 months. The king guillotined. The queen guillotined. Then the revolutionaries started guillotining each other. Robespierre himself was eventually sent to the same blade he had used on everyone else, because that is what revolutions do. They devour their own children, always. Stage 6. A new order emerged from the ashes. Napoleon Bonaparte. The revolution that began with liberty and equality ended with a military dictatorship. It took 25 years of war across all of Europe to finally stabilize. The lesson of France: when inequality becomes extreme and the government loses its credibility, the explosion that follows destroys far more than anyone intended. Russia, 1917. Russia in 1900 was the largest empire on Earth, 180 million people, territory spanning 2 continents. The Romanov dynasty had ruled for 300 years, gone in months. Stage 1. The fractures ran deep. 80% of the Russian population were peasants. They had been freed from serfdom in 1861, but freedom without land or opportunity meant nothing. In the cities, factory workers labored 14 hours a day for wages that couldn't feed a family. Meanwhile, the Tsar lived in palaces of unimaginable wealth. The nobility hosted parties that cost more than entire villages earned in a year. The gap wasn't just economic, it was feudal, medieval, and completely unsustainable. Stage 2.
Nicholas II destroyed his own legitimacy. Tsar Nicholas II believed he ruled by divine right. God had chosen him, therefore no reform was necessary, therefore the people's suffering was irrelevant. In 1905, workers marched peacefully to the Winter Palace to petition for better conditions. His guards opened fire, hundreds killed, bloody Sunday. Whatever trust remained between the people and the crown died that day. Then came World War I. Russia sent millions of poorly equipped soldiers to die. Officers were incompetent. Soldiers fought without bullets. Entire divisions surrendered because they had nothing left to fight with. And the Tsar, still in his palace, still taking advice from Rasputin, still completely detached from reality. Stage 3. The army itself turned. February 1917, bread riots in Petrograd. Soldiers were called in to restore order. They refused to fire on the crowds. They joined them. When the army will no longer defend you, it is over. The Tsar abdicated. After 300 years, the Romanov dynasty ended not with a battle, but with a letter of resignation. Stage 4. The moderates failed. A provisional government took power. They promised reform. They promised elections. They promised change. But they kept Russia in the war. Soldiers were still dying. People were still starving. And the provisional government's promises meant nothing to people who needed bread today. Into that vacuum stepped Lenin and the Bolsheviks. Stage 5. The Bolsheviks seized everything. October 1917, in a single night, the Bolsheviks stormed the Winter Palace and declared Soviet power. The entire operation took less than 24 hours. Almost bloodless, what followed was not. Stage 6. The cost was catastrophic. Civil war, 10 million dead, famine, purges, and then Stalin. The revolution that promised peace, land, and bread delivered dictatorship, forced collectivization, and mass starvation. Lenin's promises, Stalin's reality. The lesson of Russia: when military defeat meets economic collapse, meets a government completely disconnected from its people, the entire system can vanish in months, and what replaces it is almost always worse. Iran, 1979. This one is different because Iran wasn't a backwards country. It wasn't a medieval peasant society. Iran in the 1970s was modern, oil-rich, westernized, America's closest ally in the Middle East, and then overnight it became America's greatest enemy. Stage 1. Oil wealth hid the rot. The Shah's Iran looked prosperous from the outside. Highways, universities, a growing middle class, American investment pouring in. But the oil wealth was concentrated at the top. Rural Iranians saw almost none of it. Rapid westernization was being forced on a deeply religious population that hadn't asked for it. The bazaar merchants, the clerics, the rural poor all left behind, while the elite in Tehran embraced a lifestyle that felt foreign and insulting to millions of their own people. Stage 2. Fear replaced legitimacy. The Shah had no real legitimacy. He had American backing and a brutal secret police called Savak. Opponents were arrested, tortured, and disappeared, not occasionally, systematically. You cannot build lasting authority on fear alone. The moment people stop fearing you, nothing remains underneath. Stage 3. The middle class turned. The Shah's rapid modernization had created a large educated class: doctors, engineers, lawyers, university students, and many of them looked at the corruption, the repression, and the inequality and made a choice. The revolution wasn't led by the poor. It was led by educated Iranians who believed their country deserved better. Stage 4. Millions poured into the streets. Students, clerics, leftists, nationalists, merchants, people who agreed on absolutely nothing except one thing: the Shah had to go. That unity of opposition is the defining feature of Stage 4. It doesn't matter that the protesters had completely different visions for what came next. At Stage 4, they only care about destroying what exists. Stage 5. The Shah fled. January 1979. The Shah left Iran, never to return. Khomeini flew back from exile in Paris. 2 weeks later, the revolution was complete. An entire government, backed by the most powerful nation on earth, collapsed in weeks. Stage 6, America's ally became America's enemy. The Islamic Republic replaced the Shah. Secular Iranians who had supported the revolution, believing it would bring freedom, found themselves living under a theocracy. The left was purged. The liberals were purged. Everyone who wasn't Khomeini's vision of Iran was removed. Iran has been America's enemy ever since, a relationship that took decades to build, destroyed in months. The lesson of Iran: even a modern, oil-rich, American-backed government can collapse when it loses the trust of its people, and the revolution that follows rarely goes where the revolutionaries intended. 3 revolutions, 3 centuries, 3 continents: France, Russia, Iran.
You just watched 3 revolutions, 3 governments that looked permanent, 3 systems that looked unbreakable. All gone, all following the same 6 stages. Now let's talk about America in 2026, and why every single warning sign is already flashing. Stage 1. Extreme wealth inequality. In 1975, the top 1% of Americans controlled 7% of the nation's wealth. Today, that number is 32%, higher than France in 1789, higher than Russia in 1917, higher than any point in American history, including the Gilded Age. The top 0.1%, roughly 130,000 households, now own more wealth than the bottom 90% combined. That is 130,000 people versus 117 million households. Read that again. And the gap is visible, impossible to ignore. Private jets, mega yachts, billionaires racing each other to space, while the middle class can't afford a house, can't afford a hospital visit, can't afford to have children. In 1975, a CEO earned 30 times the average worker. Today, 400 times. Same country, completely different reality depending on which side of that line you were born on. The rage building underneath that gap is not irrational, it is mathematical. Check. Stage 2. Government corruption and incompetence. Trust in Congress sits at 18%. The Supreme Court's credibility is collapsing. Half the country believes elections are rigged. The other half believes the institutions protecting democracy are being weaponized. Both halves are angry. Both halves feel abandoned. And both halves are right about something. Lobbyists write the legislation. Corporations fund the politicians. Members of Congress trade stocks on information the public doesn't have. Infrastructure crumbles. The debt climbs. Problems that have been obvious for decades remain completely unsolved, not because the solutions are unknown, because the people with the power to solve them benefit from keeping them broken. When both parties are seen as corrupt, when voters believe the system serves donors and not citizens, when people stop believing their vote changes anything, that is when faith in democracy doesn't weaken, it dies. Check. Stage 3. The middle class hollowed out and radicalized. This is the stage most people overlook. Revolutions are never started by the poorest. The poorest are too exhausted, too busy surviving to organize. Revolutions start when the educated middle class loses hope in the system. And that is exactly what is happening in America right now. College graduates drowning in student debt, young professionals who did everything right, studied hard, got the degree, followed the rules, and still cannot afford to buy a home, start a family, or build the life their parents had at the same age. Teachers, nurses, engineers, lawyers, the people who should be the backbone of a stable society, falling behind every single year while asset prices climb further out of reach. When those people radicalize, and they are radicalizing, they don't just get angry, they get organized.
They look for someone to blame, they find targets, and they stop believing the system deserves their loyalty. This is how every revolution in history began, not with the poorest, with the people who expected better and didn't get it. Check. Stage 4. Loss of faith in institutions. We are here right now. Trust in the media is at historic lows. Trust in the police has fractured along racial and political lines. Trust in elections has broken down the middle of the country. Half of America believes the 2020 election was stolen. The other half believes January 6th was an attempted coup. Neither side trusts the courts. Neither side trusts the FBI. Neither side trusts any institution that doesn't already confirm what it already believes. There is no shared reality anymore. Two groups of Americans are watching the same events and seeing completely different things, not disagreeing on policy, disagreeing on facts, disagreeing on what is real. And when people stop sharing reality, they stop sharing a country. France had the Estates General the moment the system tried to fix itself and made everything worse. Russia had Bloody Sunday the moment the government fired on its own people and lost them forever. Iran had Savak the moment fear stopped working and left nothing underneath. America's spark could be anything: a contested election with no peaceful resolution, an economic crash that wipes out what's left of middle-class savings, a political assassination, a police incident that goes viral at exactly the wrong moment. The kindling is dry, has been for years. We're just waiting for the match. We are in Stage 4. History is very clear what comes after Stage 4. 3 stages completed. 1 stage currently consuming the country from the inside. The elites in France never saw it coming. The Tsar of Russia never saw it coming. The Shah of Iran never saw it coming. Each of them thought their system was too strong, too established, too deeply rooted to ever fail. Each of them was wrong. America is in Stage 4. The pattern doesn't care about American exceptionalism. The pattern has never cared about exceptionalism. It just keeps moving forward. Stage 5 is next.
America is at Stage 4. 3 stages already completed, the 4th burning through the country right now. And most Americans are calling it politics, calling it division, calling it a rough patch that the system will eventually correct. That is exactly what they said in France in 1788, in Russia in 1916, in Iran in 1978. The system did not correct. It collapsed. Stage 5, the breaking point. Stage 5 is not a process, it is a moment. One prison stormed in Paris, and France changed forever. One march fired upon in Petrograd, and the Tsar lost his people in a single afternoon. One plane landing in Tehran, and 30 years of American influence in Iran evaporated overnight. The trigger is never the cause. The Bastille did not create the French Revolution, it just gave the explosion a place to begin. The powder had been building for decades. The spark was almost irrelevant. What mattered was that the conditions were already there. In America, the conditions are already there. So what does the spark look like? It could be an election, a result that half the country refuses to accept and the other half refuses to negotiate. No peaceful resolution, no shared outcome, just 2 versions of reality, and no institution left with enough credibility to decide between them. It could be an economic collapse, the debt finally breaking, the dollar losing the global trust that has protected America for 80 years, savings gone overnight, pensions worthless, millions of people who spent their entire lives following the rules, discovering that the rules no longer protect them. It could be something nobody predicted, something that in any normal moment would disappear from the news in a week. But in Stage 4, nothing is normal. Everything becomes a symbol. Every incident becomes a side. Every spark lands on dry powder.
And once Stage 5 ignites, it moves faster than anyone expects. France went from the Bastille to mass executions in 4 years. Russia went from bread riots to a completely new government in 8 months. Iran went from protests to revolution in 14 months. Stage 5 does not wait for moderates to find a compromise. It is already past that point. Stage 6, new order or collapse. This is the stage nobody wants to look at directly, because Stage 6 is where history stops being a lesson and becomes a warning with teeth. France got the Reign of Terror, 40,000 executed, then Napoleon, then 15 years of war that consumed an entire continent. Russia got civil war, 10 million dead, then Stalin, then 7 decades of fear. Iran got a theocracy. The secular liberals who helped topple the Shah discovered too late that revolutions belong to whoever is most ruthless, not whoever had the best intentions. The pattern within the pattern is always the same. The people who start the revolution never end up in charge. The moderates get consumed, the extremists win, and the population that cheered for change discovers that chaos is worse than the corruption it replaced. What does Stage 6 look like in America? Political violence moving beyond protest into something organized and targeted. A military that fractures along political lines rather than holding together. States refusing federal authority not as a threat, but as a fact. Foreign powers who have spent decades mapping America's fault lines, finally applying pressure at exactly the right points. And an economy built on global trust in the dollar, suddenly operating without that trust. American exceptionalism says none of this is possible here. Too wealthy, too democratic, too resilient. But France said the same thing. Russia said the same thing. Iran said the same thing. The pattern did not make exceptions for any of them. There is only one force in history that has ever stopped Stage 6. Not military strength, not economic power. Leadership that chose the country over the faction. Citizens who decided that what they shared was worth more than what divided them. That choice is still available in 2026, but the window does not stay open forever. And in every case where it closed, nobody realized it was closing until it was already gone.
3 revolutions, 3 nations, 3 governments that believed they were permanent. France, Russia, Iran, all followed the same 6 stages. All reached Stage 4 thinking it was temporary. None of them were right. America in 2026 has completed 3 stages. The 4th is unfolding right now. The wealth gap, the broken institutions, the vanishing middle class, the 2 nations occupying the same territory, waiting for a spark. The pattern is not approaching, it is here. The only question that remains is whether America will make the choices that history says are almost impossible to make at this stage, or whether the pattern wins again. History is not optimistic, but history is not destiny. The choice still exists, for now. If this video changed how you see what is happening around you, my next video goes even deeper. The 7 stages of empire collapse, why America is at Stage 6. Watch it now. The link is right there.